Hello everyone, Aldon Ferguson from Viking here. Welcome to this week's In Conversation. And I have some really interesting guests which you will really enjoy listening to their story. I am a military historian. I've been involved in military history virtually all my life, since certainly I was an early teenager, specializing in aviation and with the RAF in which I served, and also the United States Air Force in Europe. I have been a lecturer on Viking, doing enhancement lectures now for well over 5 years, and my main career was in commercial property, although I kept the interest in aviation history all the way through. And I was dealing with commercial property around the UK, valuations, disposals, acquisitions, etc. And in 1990, I was asked to go to Russia by one of my major clients during the collapse of communism. And that started a completely new phase of my life, whereby in the end, I spent 17 years working in and around the former Soviet Union. Now, this gave me a huge insight into the savvy of the Soviet people and the understanding of the Soviets, which really helped in my understanding and lecturing of both World War II and the Cold War. Back in September 2019, I was on the cruise in the wake of the Vikings, which was sailing from Bergen through to Montreal via the Faroe Islands and Iceland. In Iceland, I was giving a lecture about the role of Iceland in World War II. And very, very few people, I found, understand that Britain occupied Iceland in 1940 to prevent the Nazis from occupying it. And in fact, the British handed over the occupation to the Americans in 1941, before the USA joined World War II. It makes a very interesting lecture. So Britain occupied, it literally walked in to Iceland. They were negotiating very hard with the Icelanders to allow Britain to occupy the island, to protect it, to prevent the Germans coming, and in which case it would allow the British and their allies to control the shipping and aircraft traveling to a point in the North Atlantic and prevent the Germans from having the island of Iceland as a U-boat base, which would then cause major problems with the convoys both across the Atlantic from Britain to the USA, but later, when we had the Arctic convoys, even more. So Britain marched, first of all, into the Faroe Islands, immediately after, literally a few days after Germany occupied Norway. Britain walked literally into the Faroe Islands and took it over. One ship, and it just took it. Then 4 ships, 4 weeks later, arrived in Iceland, totally unannounced. And they landed. There was no opposition of any form because the Icelanders had no defense force. They had no military. And the British just arrived. The British ambassador knew they were coming. All the locals came down to see what was going on. Not a single shot was fired. Nobody was hurt. Nobody was killed. No aggravation of any form. In fact, the British consul asked the chief of police if he could move the Icelandic people back a little bit to allow the British to land. And his answer was, "Certainly, sir, of course we will. We'll move them back." It was a very open and friendly invasion, if I can call it that. The main thing is it was bloodless. The Icelandic government objected, of course, because they wanted to maintain their neutrality, but they understood that it was necessary, and the British promised that they would not be causing any major problem. They would allow the Icelanders to live a normal life. It wouldn't be like the German occupation of the countries in Europe. The good thing that it brought was a huge amount of employment to the Icelandic people. They had suffered under the depression of the 30s. They'd lost a lot of their young men who had emigrated to the States. And suddenly there were jobs because the British wanted airfields built. They wanted the dock facilities at Reykjavik and Akureyri to be improved. They wanted new roads around the island because there weren't any proper roads. They needed bridges. They needed hutting to be built for the British troops. They needed a hospital to be built in case of hostilities, etc. Suddenly it was a boom, and everybody on Iceland who had been previously unemployed were now suddenly employed and earning a lot of money. They built the airfields. The RAF arrived in numbers to protect the island. All this was part of the lecture. At the end of the lecture, I was approached by two of my guests today, by Eric and Wendy, and they explained to me why they were on this cruise. Wendy's mother had been widowed because she had married a Norwegian pilot who joined the RAF, and he had been killed in Iceland during the war in November 1942. They didn't know a lot about it. They knew obviously who he was. They had a date. They knew he was buried. They knew there was a grave. So they came prepared to put a photograph of the wedding and the flags of Canada and Norway on the grave. Beyond that, they didn't know anything. To me, that was a challenge because I love to do research and to try and help people who are in a situation like that. So immediately I started researching it, and by the end of that cruise, or in fact by the end of the next few days, I was able to come up with part of the story. We found out exactly the type of aircraft that Arnie, his name was Arnie, died in. We found that it was a crew of 3, and we found that he was the only body that was managed to be taken from the wreckage. We found there had been an eyewitness on an American ship had actually seen the aircraft crash, and we had the eyewitness story. So we were put together a lot of this story together. I was able to pass it over to Eric and Wendy, partially during the cruise and partially once we'd all got home. Eric had asked the IT personnel on the Viking Sun, is it possible to have a copy of my lecture? And of course they said yes, and gave Eric a copy of it. So they took it home and they showed it to Maureen so she could see me talking about it, but it wasn't about that particular incident. It was just generally about the war in Iceland and the various bad things as well as the good things that happened. And this photograph is Maureen and Wendy looking at the photograph. So at this point, it's an ideal time to welcome you to my guests. And I am delighted to welcome the 3 guests who are all in Canada at this moment. And we now have Eric Wood on the left, Eric Green on the left, I'm sorry, Maureen in the middle, and Wendy on the right-hand side. Welcome to you all. I'll just continue for a moment and say that subsequent to our meeting and subsequent to the various emails which were flying backwards and forwards between us, I did another double cruise to Iceland. And when I was there, I had the good fortune of meeting up with the same taxi driver, and I undertook some more research. And on one of the visits I did as an escort from the ship, we went to a military museum. And in that museum, as I walked in, was the video of a Northrop float plane flying, which was exactly the type of aircraft which Arnie flew and was killed in during the war. And for a fleeting second, I wondered, is this actually the same aircraft that he died in? It wasn't the same, but it was the same squadron, it was the same type, and it gave a really good description of it. So putting that together and sending it across to Canada to Eric and Wendy and Maureen, we were thinking maybe we had almost closure. We almost had a complete story on the death and what had happened. But there is a big story here as to why the 3 of you were going to come on this cruise, and in the end it was only 2. But perhaps now is a good opportunity for Eric to explain how the cruise came about, what they were trying to achieve, and the way it worked out. Eric, if you could let us have your memories on that, it would be really appropriate.
Right. Okay. Hello. I'd like to start by saying that when we had no intentions of this Iceland trip at all until one day, mid-July 2019, Maureen and Wendy had to go to the doctor's office just for a normal visit. And during that doctor's visit, at the end of it, Maureen looked at the doctor and said, "Doctor, is it possible that I could travel?" And the doctor at that time says, "Well, you know, you're 95, but your health is terrific. I see no problem." And then the next question the doctor asked is, "Where do you want to go?" Well, at this stage, Wendy was flabbergasted. This was quite new to all, to her, and as she related to me when she got back from the doctor's visit. Maureen said to the doctor, "I want to go to Iceland and Norway." And right away, we knew that what all of this was about, and it turned out that Maureen's bucket list wish was to see Arnie's homeland, hopefully his farm, and also the gravesite in Iceland.
And to meet his sister.
And to meet his sister, right? Yes. And at that time, this was July the 15th, and when Wendy and Maureen left the doctor's office on the way home, Maureen had entered another thought. She says, "And by the way, I'd like to go by sea." And boy, when Wendy returned and said, "This is what's happened," I said, "Well, when would Maureen like to go?" And she said, "Well, right away." And immediately I'm thinking, okay, you want to go by sea? You want to visit Iceland? You want to visit Norway? This is, and immediately I went online to, as all I could think about is repositioning of the cruise lines during the autumn, season. I went there and there was lists of all the cruise lines going south through Spain and across to the Caribbean and to Florida and setting up for their winter session. Yet there was one entry there that said Viking. I'm thinking, Viking, and they're repositioning. We had no idea until we got into Norway that this was a Vikings world trip, and that we were in the section that was noted as in the wake of the Vikings. But it answered all of our questions about, the ability, for Maureen not only to have this trip, but by sea and visit whatever what our destinations were. So within 6 weeks, we had to figure out, is it possible? Immediately, we went to the travel agent and said, the travel agent come up, empty as far as repositions are, and we noted that we'd found Viking. So she says, okay, right away, I'm on to Viking. And, she managed to tell us within a couple of hours that Viking, believe it or not, could accommodate us in September, which was, the 6 weeks away. So, right away, we were in full flight to get everything organized. Viking gave us 24 hours to approve of this because it was last minute. And Viking not only found 2 cabins for us, but they found 2 adjoining cabins, which was incredible. And from that time on, we were in fast mode. We had to deal with Maureen's ability as far as and capabilities for walkers and wheelchairs, and we immediately had to get in touch with the Viking contact people and service people in California, explain the situation. They were so accommodating. They just needed the wheelchair makes and sizes, and they said as far as everything went, they were very comfortable. They would then have to go through the Viking Corporation to get approval to bring Maureen on board, and also possibly the captain. Well, it was unbelievable. Viking just immediately gave us such help and confidence, and we went forward from there. It was really a seamless operation as far as we were, and having known that, we then went back. We then had to do the trips to the outdoor outfitting stores to get Maureen outfitted for the North Atlantic climate and things up which were that we'd have to consider taking her along on this voyage. So all in all, it was just a very, very comfortable and a wonderful experience to have Viking so easily accessible and on our side. It made our lives just perfect for us.
That's really, really good news and a very, very nice story to happen. But it had a sad ending, didn't it? In that Maureen couldn't make it.
It did. Within a week of departure, which was we were to be in Bergen, Norway on September the 12th. Unfortunately, Maureen had a health issue, and Maureen just had to say, "I'm sorry, I have to back out of this." But she said, I want you kids, as she called us, to go forward and do us as what we had planned. So this is where we then flew out of Toronto and met the Viking Sun at Bergen.
That's a great story. Now, this is also a really nice touch in that on the flight, which was an Icelandic airline flight, I think, there was a book, Shared Stories. And Maureen, you took this book and you put the story in it. Can you just tell us a little bit about it?
Wendy?
Sorry, Wendy.
Yes, Aldon. It was, we had our seats, sat down, and immediately I saw the book right in front of us in the seat before me, and took the book out, and the words just flowed out of me. It was something that I needed to do. I had to express. It just was so important for me to be able to write this down and then to leave it as a story for somebody else. Maybe on the next flight, they might pick up that book and read that story. There were several stories in the book from other families who were traveling and the reasons for their travels, their journeys, and who was with them at the time. Some were individuals, some were couples and families traveling together. And I thought, this is just such a wonderful opportunity to kick off the trip with being able to just, right from the very beginning, slide it in and just describe why we were on this trip, and to say that we were hoping that although my mother could not accompany us, unfortunately, on this trip, that it gave us an opportunity to hopefully bring closure for her, because this was something that she had experienced long before I was ever born. And yet, as a young child, all through the years of growing up, I'd heard so much about Arnie, and it was always deep within my mother's heart. So it was wonderful to be able to share it.
It's a great story, and I have read what you wrote several times, and it's so touching, and it's there for lots and lots of future people to read and to take to heart. And it's full marks to Iceland there, but full marks to you, Wendy, for actually doing that and putting that story down. Coming back to Arnie, he was Norwegian. He was a merchant seaman, and he was away from Norway when the Germans occupied, and he clearly couldn't go back. If he did, he would have been captured by the Germans, and anything could have happened to him. So he stayed in Canada And he joined up with a lot of expatriate Norwegians who were in the same position. They'd escaped or they'd already moved away. And they were in this camp near Toronto called Little Norway. And part of that was an airfield, and they taught him to fly. And whilst he was there, he met Maureen. And Maureen, I would love to hear your memories of meeting Arnie, what you thought of him, and your early times together leading up to your marriage. Can you tell us how you first met him?
Oh, yes, it was at a social that had been put on by the local women connected with the church to entertain the boys that had come from all over the world to be trained in Canada. And so they were doing this. And when I heard that, I said to my friend, would you like to go down and we could meet some of these people and perhaps help them? And she said, sure, I'd love to. So we went to this particular lovely place. Actually, it was set aside for this. And yes, it was all there for us. And we were very, very happy talking with these people. And Arnie was one of the people selected just out of the blue. So it could have been anybody, but it was Arnie. And that's how it happened.
And then you went out together, and you courted, and eventually you married.
I'm so sorry for interrupting you, but yes, he came to my home. My mom and dad fell in love with him because that was the kind of person Arnie was. And he went up to Sturgeon Point to our lovely cottage, played our golf on the golf field, and he learned, and we learned so much about Arnie, and our love deepened very much.
And so you were married in Toronto, is that correct? Yes.
Yes.
And your honeymoon was in Canada, and he was here. You are on your honeymoon, having a lovely time. I'm sure that was one of the happiest times of your life, because you were obviously deeply in love with him. And as you said, a very attractive man, very attractive lady, two together. And he, I know, was, once he'd learned to fly, he was doing transatlantic ferry flights. He was ferrying aircraft across the Atlantic. And then here he is, probably learning to fly on the left-hand side. And here's a very muscular Arnie on the right-hand side, showing his muscles off. After he had flown several times across the Atlantic, he joined an RAF squadron, which was manned by Norwegian personnel. It was Norwegian personnel like himself who had been displaced as a result of the war. So he formed this squadron, and it was flying the float planes, two different types of planes, the Northrop plane on the left-hand side there, which was a three-seater, which was the type that he crashed in. And on the right-hand side, it's actually, this photograph is showing a lady, an Icelandic lady, being put into one of the aircraft to be taken to hospital from a very remote part of Iceland. But because there were so few airfields and the roads were so poor, it was much easier to have seaplanes like this. And that's exactly what he was flying. And sadly, that's what crashed when he passed away. And then he'd only been married for 3 or 4 months when you got this terrible letter saying, we're sorry to tell you that he's been killed in a crash, which is such a terrible shame. And here is the death certificate, which was sent by the Norwegian consul, just confirming the date and the name of the death, which must have torn you apart from so closely after that wonderful wedding and being in so much love with him. So as a result of that, you decided you were not going to just sit in Canada and do nothing. You decided you were going to join the Canadian Air Force. So could you just tell us a little bit about what motivated you to join and the beginning of your time in the Canadian Air Force? Maureen, please.
Well, I had just reached the age of 19, and I felt that I wanted to do something for my country, particularly when Arnie had given his life. And I was very, very strong within me that I wanted to do this. I went to my parents right away and said, would there be any objections? Because I was only 19 at the time. And they said, if this is what you want. They didn't hold me back, which I give wonderful tribute to my mother and father for this very fact, that they could have been the two that held me back, and they didn't. And I was able to take training. I was sent overseas, a member of the Royal Canadian Air Force Women's Division. And I had responsibilities because I had to look after not everybody could read the instructions and everything. It was all in code. That's the word I wanted. It was all in code. So it was really quite wonderful.
So I understand also you were one of the youngest Canadian women to be sent overseas. You were only 19. You'd done your basic training. You were a very young lady, and first time away from home, really, and sent all the way across to Britain in, I assume, a ship, because there were so few aircraft flying, and you had to go across U-boat infested waters where Germans were out to try and sink any ships going between Canada and the UK. So there was a war risk. Here you are in Canada. The top right hand side on this photograph is Maureen with the other ladies who had undertaken their training, and they're waiting to be posted to England. And what an adventure that must have been. I assume it was partially an escape from Arne's death, in that you were doing something good for the country and yourself, and moving on as you had to, obviously, under the circumstances. And you arrived in England, and as you say, you were with number 6 group, which was a Canadian group managing 14 Canadian bomber squadrons, and you were sending out the coded messages, giving them the targets. So they had to be absolutely spot on accurate where they were going to bomb. And as a 19-year-old, a huge amount of really responsibility on your shoulders. And while you were in the UK, you had to work hard, but I think you played fairly hard as well. You travelled. You had quite a good time with the other ladies, the other WAFs.
We had a wonderful time. We lived in a decent hut, so cold, and a little pot-belly stove in the middle. We used to eat the hot chocolate on that and sit around. Oh, sugary, but we were in our element.
They were coke. They were heated by coke, weren't they? And you can see the left-hand side there. You can just see the little chimney sticking out of the roof, which above your head. And that is the coke stove. They were terribly difficult to light, but once they were lit, they were very, very hot. So here you are with all different colleagues in the military, all Canadian, and you travelled around. I know we have a photograph of you in Scarborough. You travelled around the UK. Here you are with Hilda, your good friend Hilda, in Scarborough with some dogs. Very smart in your uniforms, and you actually met your grandparents, your mother's parents, who were English when you were in England as well. And you were saying, oh, here you are with 2 air crew roller skating. Have you any idea where this was? Have you any idea where this photograph was taken?
Yes, it was taken at one of the roller rinks where we were skating with the young fellows who were flying men going into the war zone.
Okay.
They were doing. But coming to the ball, the place that It was like a little circular place. We go round and round.
Okay, you remember it. It's incredible after all these years how it still comes back. And you were saying your grandfather lived in Folkestone. Here he is on the left. Can you just tell us a little bit about them?
Yes, and my grandfather spent his youth and later in life sailing the seas. He was a captain, Captain Henry. Yeah.
Had you ever met them before the war?
Oh no, because I was born and bred in Canada,
Of
and
course.
this is my trip over.
So was that the only time you actually met them?
19 when I went over.
Oh, okay. Right. When the war ended in 1945, Maureen obviously was sent back to the UK, and she met somebody else, understandably, and she married, and one of her children was Wendy, who's here with us on today. Now, when I was doing this research, I was very, very lucky. I had a taxi driver who we picked up on our very first trip to Iceland called John Loftsson, who was a wonderful guy. He drove a very big Mercedes taxi. He knew his way around Iceland and everywhere like the back of his hand. But the great thing about John was they all speak perfect English, and he certainly did. He was also very, very military minded. And he was actually in an organization called the Churchill Club, named after Winston Churchill. And they did all sorts of trips around the different museums and military sites on Iceland. And it's surprising how many there were. He knew I was interested in the history of the war in Iceland. And the second time he picked us up, the first thing he said was, there's a new book on Iceland, and it's in English, and it's just been released, and this is it. And so I said, right, please, to the bookshop immediately. So if you notice here, the subtitle, A Blessed War. So it's all about Iceland in World War II. It mirrors the fact that the Icelanders did extremely well out of it. The whole country developed. But in the back of that book was a key to references of different websites. And one of those websites was all the accidents on Iceland. And it was as a result of that and him that I was able to pinpoint this actual aircraft accident, and we found out all this additional material. I also asked him to take me to the cemetery. I knew Eric and Wendy were going to the cemetery. We knew where the Norwegian graves were. We didn't know when you were going, and you beat us to it. By the time we got there, the photograph and the flags were there. But these wonderful photographs are showing Eric and Wendy putting the marriage photograph on Arnie's gravestone. There are a row of Norwegian gravestones here, and here we have the Canadian flag and the Norwegian flag. And this is the first time it is believed that anybody in the family had seen this grave. And Wendy, you were there. You placed the picture there. I'd love to know what was going on in your mind when you actually were doing this.
Oh my goodness, it was such an emotional experience. It really caught me off guard. I did not expect that I would have such a deep reaction to going to the cemetery and seeing Arnie's grave. I was so many emotions going through me at that time. And there were tears shed, absolutely. And I just wished so much that Mom could be with us at that particular moment. I thought, if only I could just click my finger and she'd be there with us. But it was a beautiful spot. It's a beautiful cemetery. Our taxi driver as well knew exactly where we needed to go, and he offered to take us. He parked his car in the parking lot and took us right to the spot, and even took our camera and took photos of Eric and I, took some videos. He was just a gem. We were so fortunate in so many, many ways. We just felt so blessed to have been able to make this journey on Mom's behalf. And yes, it's a beautiful spot. It was a rainy day, a little bit drizzly, but it was so still and quiet, and the birds were just singing away. It was very peaceful, and I really wish I could have stayed there longer.
Oh, yeah.
I can fully understand that, because we followed you. We were there within an hour after you going. And these places also have a special meaning to me, because all those people there went over and none of them returned. And to see that row of Norwegian graves, and to see that photograph which you had showed me on the ship, and the flags sitting there. I took a load of photographs myself, and I use those photographs in lectures. In fact, I used one in a lecture last week to people. And I told you a result of that story in that one of the people watching is actually building a model of a Northrop float plane, and gave me more information about those aircraft. But to stand there in that cemetery, the link between you and Arnie, and it's such a shame that Maureen couldn't make it, but you have the video, you have the photographs, you have the description, the memory, and it was just a wonderful, wonderful moment. It's sad, and yet it's almost poetic. It just has such a special meaning. It's almost impossible to actually say how you feel at the time. So it's wonderful that, in fact, Viking made it possible for us all to somehow, all the coincidences that came together to make this possible. And then Maureen left Britain, and she came back to the States. She married, she had a family, and but she kept her involvement with the military. She was very proud of her medals that she obtained from World War II. She's wearing a poppy now, and I know that she followed the Remembrance Day. Here she is on the left, look, ready to go out to a Remembrance Day ceremony. Am I right in thinking, Maureen, you actually used to sell poppies? You go and sell poppies in the street in Canada, or is that not right?
No, I don't think she was involved with the Veterans Association to that.
No, but you went out with them for Remembrance Day, which obviously is coming up very shortly from today when we're doing this recording. And you also sent a certificate, Maureen, to thank you for your war service, which came from the Canadian government. On behalf of a grateful nation, they present this certificate of recognition to you as a tribute to your selfless act of service and sacrifice during the Second World War in defense of Canada. And you had to travel across the Atlantic under adverse circumstances. You were at risk being in a headquarters building. It was a target for the Luftwaffe. I know you had a good time, but you were at risk. You put your life at risk as a military veteran, and quite rightly you have been rewarded and applauded for that. And I applaud you for what you did for our joint nations. So we really come the full circle. We have to say thank you to Viking again for putting us together, and for being able to make the little lecture I was doing into something far more interesting and far more personal, and to be able to create a story such as this, whereby you start off not knowing a lot, but you know a little, and in the end we all learn from it. I learned a huge amount from it, and we, I think, hopefully collectively have gained recognition, and we can say that Arnie did a wonderful job. He was away from home. He had lost a brother who was also killed during the war. And I have to say, in tribute to Maureen, that Maureen was entitled to a Norwegian pension, and she gave that pension up to Arnie's mother, who was in more need of it than she was. And yet another sacrifice for you to make for your ex-husband, and I think that's absolutely fantastic. And to see the three of you here today, it's wonderful. It was wonderful to hear all the story right the way through, from the wedding to the current day. And I wish you many, many more happy Armistice days. And thank you very much for joining me today and being able to share this wonderful story. Thank you very much indeed.
Well, I think from all of us here, thank you very much, Aldon. It's been a pleasure.
Indeed.
Thank you, Aldon.
I've enjoyed every second of it. I hope you have too.
We certainly have. We certainly have. It's been a unique experience, and I think we're going to share these stories and this particular story for a long time ahead of us. So thank you very much for helping us through all of this.
Thank you all, and thank you, Viking.